Sometimes the measure of a man isn't found in what he says, but in what he does when no one else is watching. On a frozen winter night at a frontier trading post, a young woman lay dying on a wooden bench while good people walked past her, one after another. When mountain man Caleb Stone arrived and saw her there, barely breathing, he didn't ask questions. He wrapped her in his heavy coat and carried her through a blizzard to his cabin miles away. 3 days later, he returned with her alive and safe. What he told the settlement about who left her to die changed everything. The real question is, what does a man like Caleb do when he discovers the truth? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The settlement of Bent Creek wasn't much to speak of, even by frontier standards. Tucked into a valley where the Northern Territories met the edge of the Great Mountains, it consisted of perhaps 24 structures scattered along a frozen creek that wouldn't thaw until April. The trading post stood at the center of everything, a squat log building with a stone chimney that poured smoke into the winter sky from dawn until well past dark. Around it clustered a saloon, a livery, a blacksmith's forge, and the scattered cabins of folks who decided this lonely spot was as far as they needed to go. Winter of 1873 had come early and stayed late. By mid-December, snow lay 3 feet deep in the valley and twice that in the mountain passes. The folks of Bent Creek had settled into the rhythm of cold weather survival. Keep the fires burning, stretch the supplies, and wait for spring. Most didn't venture far from their doors unless necessity demanded it. The world had shrunk to the distance between home and hearth, and that suited most people just fine. Caleb Stone lived beyond that shrunken world. His cabin sat 12 miles up into the mountains, accessible only by a trail that disappeared entirely under winter snow. He'd built it there deliberately after the fever took his wife and daughter 5 years back. Mary and little Sarah had been his entire world, and when they'd slipped away within days of each other, something in Caleb had broken so completely that he couldn't bear to stay among people anymore. The mountains offered something the settlements never could: silence deep enough to drown out memory. He was 45 years old, though the mountains had weathered him in ways that added years to his face. Tall and lean, with shoulders broadened by years of splitting wood and hauling game, he moved with the deliberate economy of a man who'd learned to waste nothing, not even motion. His beard had gone mostly gray, his hands were scarred from 1,000 small battles with the wilderness, and his eyes held the particular shade of blue you only saw in deep ice. People said those eyes could look right through you, and they weren't entirely wrong. Caleb had learned to see what folks tried to hide, not from any special gift, but from simple attention. When you lived alone, you learned to read the world carefully. 4 times a year, Caleb made the journey down to Bent Creek for supplies. He timed these trips carefully. Late September before the first heavy snows, mid-December before the passes became impassable, early March when the thaw began, and late June when the high country finally opened up. Each trip followed the same pattern. He'd arrive at the trading post with pelts and a list, conduct his business with few words, perhaps share a drink at the saloon if pressed, and disappear back up the mountain before anyone could draw him into conversation that went deeper than weather and game conditions. Samuel Bridger ran the trading post, and he understood Caleb better than most. Bridger was a practical man in his 60s, gray-haired and thick around the middle, with sharp eyes that catalogued every transaction in a worn leather ledger he'd kept for 20 years. That ledger told the story of Bent Creek in numbers and notations: who owed what, who paid fare, who needed credit until spring. Bridger's wife had passed some years back, and though he'd never buried himself in the mountains like Caleb, he recognized the particular loneliness of a man who'd loved and lost. He gave Caleb his space, conducted business with quiet efficiency, and never asked questions that didn't pertain to the transaction at hand. Doc Holloway was another matter. The settlement's physician was a small, nervous man with thinning hair and hands that shook slightly when he wasn't working. He'd served as a field surgeon during the war, seen things that still woke him at night, and he drank more than he probably should to keep those memories quiet. But his hands steadied when someone needed him, and he'd saved more lives than he'd lost, which was about all you could ask of a frontier doctor. He'd treated Mary and Sarah in those final days, worked himself near to collapse trying to break the fever, and he'd wept openly when they died. He still couldn't look Caleb in the eye without guilt shadowing his features, though Caleb had never blamed him. Some things were beyond any man's power to fix. Sheriff Morton represented law in Bent Creek, though his authority extended only as far as folks were willing to respect it. He was a former cavalry officer, square-jawed and proper, who'd taken the position because retirement didn't suit him, and he needed purpose. He enforced what laws he could, mediated disputes, and generally tried to keep the peace in a place where peace was mostly a matter of people being too cold or too tired to cause trouble. He respected Caleb's solitude, but watched him with the careful attention of a man trained to assess potential threats. Not that he considered Caleb dangerous exactly, but a man who chose complete isolation was a man who'd left society's constraints behind, and that made him unpredictable. The trading post itself smelled of leather, tobacco, coffee, and the particular mustiness of goods stored through long winters. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from ammunition to axe heads, salt pork to sugar, needles to nails. Pelts hung from the rafters, waiting to be bundled and shipped east come spring. A pot-bellied stove dominated the center of the room, radiating heat that never quite reached the corners. Men gathered around it on cold evenings, trading stories and gossip, conducting the social business that kept a settlement functioning. Caleb had arrived at Bent Creek on the afternoon of December 18th, the sky already dimming toward the early winter sunset. He'd made good time down the mountain, the trail packed solid enough by his previous trips that his horse managed the descent without trouble. The pack horse behind him carried pelts, marten, fox, and 2 prime beaver, that would cover his supply needs and then some. He'd been trapping well this season, the cold driving animals to lower elevations where his lines were set. The trading post was busy when he entered, stamping snow from his boots. Half a dozen men clustered around the stove, their conversation pausing as they noted his arrival. Caleb nodded a general greeting and headed straight for the counter where Bridger was tallying accounts in his ledger. "Stone." Bridger looked up, his expression neutral but not unwelcoming. "Figured you'd be down before the next storm." "Storm coming." Caleb set his list on the counter. "Tonight, most likely. Temperatures dropping fast." Bridger glanced at the list, his practiced eye calculating totals. "This'll take me an hour or so to gather. You staying the night?" "Rather not. I'll load up and head back before full dark." Bridger didn't argue. He'd learned long ago that Caleb's mind, once set, wasn't easily changed. "I'll work quick then. Your pelts in the usual condition?" "Better than usual. That big beaver's prime." They conducted their business with the efficiency of long practice, voices low, terms clear. Around them, the post's atmosphere slowly returned to normal as the other men resumed their conversations. Caleb caught fragments, talk of livestock, complaints about the cold, speculation about when the passes would clear. Come spring, normal frontier concerns, the mundane worries of people building lives in hard country. He didn't notice, at first, the undercurrent of tension beneath those conversations. Didn't catch the way men's eyes cut toward the door or how voices lowered when certain subjects arose. He was focused on his transaction with Bridger, mentally reviewing his supply list, calculating whether he'd need to make another trip before spring or if he could stretch things until March. It wasn't until he'd loaded his purchases onto the pack horse and secured the ropes that something made him pause. A feeling, nothing more definite than that. The kind of instinct a man developed after years in the wilderness, where survival depended on noticing what didn't fit. He stood beside his horses in the gathering dusk, the temperature dropping noticeably as the sun touched the mountain peaks, and he felt it. Wrongness, subtle but present. Caleb turned slowly, scanning the settlement. Most folks had retreated indoors as the cold deepened. Lamplight glowed in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Everything appeared normal. But that feeling persisted, raising the hair on the back of his neck the way it did when he sensed a predator watching from the tree line. Then he saw her. On the bench outside the trading post, partially obscured by the shadows and the snow that had begun to fall again, a figure sat motionless. At first, he thought it might be someone resting, taking a moment before heading home. But something about the stillness was wrong. People at rest shifted, adjusted, showed signs of life. This figure might have been carved from ice. Caleb walked closer, his boots crunching in the snow. As he approached, details emerged from the dimness. A woman, young, dressed in clothes that had once been fine but now hung on her frame, torn and filthy. Her head lolled forward, dark hair matted with ice. Snow had accumulated on her shoulders and lap, suggesting she'd been sitting there for some time, long enough that her body heat no longer melted what fell on her. He stopped 3 feet away, his breath visible in the cold air. Her lips were blue. Her hands, barely visible beneath thin sleeves, had gone the waxy white of severe frostbite. She wasn't moving at all. "Miss?" His voice was quiet, testing. No response. Caleb looked around. The trading post door stood closed. Windows glowed with warm light. Inside, he could see figures moving, men gathered around the stove. They were no more than 20 feet away, on the other side of a simple door. They knew she was out here. They had to know. He looked back at the woman and made his decision. Caleb pushed open the trading post door. Warmth and noise rushed out to meet him, along with the smell of tobacco smoke and wet wool. The conversations didn't stop this time. The men were too engaged in their discussions to notice his return. He walked straight to the counter where Bridger was restocking shelves. "Samuel," Caleb kept his voice low. "There's a woman outside, on the bench." Bridger's hands paused mid-motion, then resumed their work. "I know. She's dying. I expect so." Bridger didn't turn around. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. "You going to help her?" Now Bridger did turn, and his face was tired. "Can't. Can't or won't. Both, if I'm being honest." Bridger set down the tin he'd been holding and leaned against the counter. "Listen, Stone, I understand how it looks. But that woman is trouble we can't afford." "Trouble how?" Bridger glanced at the men around the stove, then gestured for Caleb to follow him to the far corner of the post where they could speak more privately. When they were out of easy earshot, Bridger's voice dropped even lower. "She was brought here 2 days ago by Marcus Thornhill's men. You know that name?" Caleb shook his head. "Big rancher from the Southern Territory. Owns half of 3 counties, has judges and politicians in his pocket. The kind of man you don't cross unless you're ready for serious consequences." Bridger rubbed his face. "His men rode in with her, bound in the back of a wagon. Said she was a thief and a liar, that she'd stolen from Thornhill and tried to blackmail him besides. They wanted to leave her here as a lesson. Frontier justice, they called it. So you just let them. What was I supposed to do? We've got no jail here, no real law beyond Morton, and he's one man with no authority outside this settlement. Thornhill's outfit had 8 armed riders. They made it real clear we either took her off their hands, or they'd burn the trading post down with her inside it." Caleb's jaw tightened. Morton know about this. He knows. He wasn't happy about it, but what could he do? Start a shooting war with Thornhill's men? Get folks here killed over some woman none of us know? Bridger's voice carried genuine distress. "Look, I'm not proud of it. None of us are. But we've got families here, Stone. Children. We can't afford to make enemies of men like Thornhill. So you're letting her freeze to death. They said if she was innocent, the Lord would provide. If she was guilty, Nature would take its course. Bridger's voice turned bitter. Real convenient theology when you want someone dead but don't want blood on your hands. Caleb looked back toward the door. Through the window, he could just make out the woman's silhouette on the bench, snow continuing to fall around her. How long has she been out there? Since yesterday afternoon. They left before the storm hit, rode out knowing what would happen to her. Bridger met Caleb's eyes. Doc looked at her yesterday evening, said she wouldn't last the night. That was, 18 hours ago? I'm surprised she's still breathing. Did she say anything? Tell her sight? They had her gagged when they brought her. Took it off before they left, but she hasn't spoken. Just sits there, staring at nothing. Doc thinks maybe her mind broke or she's too far gone to care anymore. Caleb stood silent for a long moment, processing this. Around them, the trading post carried on its business. Men laughed at some joke. Someone coughed. The stove crackled. Normal life continuing while a woman died 20 feet away. I'm taking her, Caleb said finally. Bridger's eyes widened. Stone, you can't. If Thornhill finds out, how's he going to find out? You said his men left before the storm. They're long gone, probably assume she's dead by now. And when she turns up alive? She won't turn up anywhere. She'll be at my cabin, 12 miles, up a mountain trail that's about to become impassable for the next 3 months. Caleb's voice was calm, decided. Nobody's going to find her there. This is a mistake. Bridger's voice carried conviction. You're risking your life for someone who might be exactly what Thornhill says she is. Maybe. Or maybe she's innocent and you're all letting her die because it's easier than doing what's right. Caleb turned toward the door, then paused. Either way, I can't stand by and watch it happen. He walked back into the cold before Bridger could respond. Behind him, he heard Doc Holloway's voice. Samuel, what's he? But the door closed and cut off the rest. The woman hadn't moved. Caleb knelt beside her, studying her face. Young, maybe 25 or so, though it was hard to tell with the frost and grime. Her breathing was shallow, barely visible. When he touched her hand, the skin felt like frozen leather. Around her neck hung a silver locket, the only piece of jewelry visible. The chain had left a thin red line where it pressed against her skin. Caleb didn't touch it, didn't want to disturb what might be her only possession. Miss? He spoke softly, not expecting a response. I'm going to help you. Can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered. The first movement he'd seen from her, but didn't open. Caleb stood and began removing his heavy wool coat. The cold hit him immediately, the temperature having dropped well below freezing as night approached. He wrapped the coat around the woman, tucking it carefully around her body. She was frighteningly light when he lifted her, her weight barely registering against his strength. He could feel her bones through the thin fabric of her dress. The trading post door opened. Doc Holloway stepped out, his face troubled. Caleb, you shouldn't... I know what I shouldn't do, Doc. I'm doing it anyway. She might not survive the journey. Probably won't in this cold. She definitely won't survive sitting on this bench. Caleb adjusted his grip, cradling the woman against his chest. You going to try to stop me? Doc looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. No, but I'm going to worry about you. Both of you. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bottle. Laudanum. If she wakes and she's in pain, a few drops in water. Not too much. Caleb took the bottle with his free hand. Thanks, Doc. Caleb. Doc's voice stopped him as he turned toward his horses. If she lives, if you get her through this, she's going to need more help than just warmth and food. Whatever happened to her, whatever she ran from, it broke something. I could see it in her eyes yesterday before they went empty. She's been hurt bad, in ways that won't show bruises. I'll do what I can. I know you will. That's what worries me. You've been alone a long time. Don't... Doc paused, searching for words. Don't let kindness turn into something that hurts you worse. Caleb nodded, understanding what Doc wasn't quite saying. Then he carried the woman to his horses. Securing her on the saddle while keeping her wrapped in his coat took careful work. He settled her in front of him, one arm holding her steady, and arranged the coat so it covered them both as much as possible. It wasn't ideal. He'd have both hands occupied managing her weight and the reins, but there was no other way. Sheriff Morton emerged from the saloon as Caleb was mounting. He stood in the street, watching, his hand resting on his belt near his sidearm, though not touching the weapon itself. "You know what you're doing, Stone?" "Not really, but I'm doing it anyway." "If Thornhill's men come back, tell them she died in the night. Tell them you buried her. Tell them whatever you need to." Caleb gathered the reins. "I won't be back until spring. By then, this will be old news." Morton's face was unreadable in the dimming light. Finally, he nodded once. Safe journey. The ride up the mountain began in full darkness, the storm intensifying as Caleb left the settlement behind. Snow fell thick and heavy, driven by wind that cut through his shirt like knives. Without his coat, the cold attacked him mercilessly. Within the first mile, he'd lost feeling in his fingers. By the second mile, his whole body shook with violent shivers. The woman in his arms remained utterly still, her breathing so faint he had to keep checking to make sure she was still alive. Several times he thought he'd lost her, that she'd slipped away while he focused on navigating the treacherous path. Each time, he'd find the slight rise and fall of her chest beneath the coat and press on. The trail disappeared entirely under the snow. Caleb navigated by memory and instinct, following the general direction up the slope, trusting his horse to find solid footing. The pack horse followed behind, connected by a lead rope, its cargo of supplies potentially meaningless if they didn't survive the night. Time lost meaning. There was only the cold, the dark, the wind, and the desperate need to keep moving. Caleb's mind began to drift, memories surfacing unbidden. Mary's face bright with laughter, Sarah's small hand in his. The fever that had taken them, the helplessness he'd felt watching them slip away despite every prayer and desperate plea. He'd failed them, failed to protect them from something he couldn't fight. But this woman, this stranger, she was something he could fight for. The cold, the storm, the distance, these were enemies he understood, concrete and physical, survivable. He held her tighter and pushed on. When the cabin finally appeared through the snow, Caleb initially thought he was hallucinating. His body had gone beyond cold into a dangerous numbness. But then he recognized the shape of his porch, the dark outline of his door, and relief flooded through him with such intensity he nearly wept. Getting the woman inside took the last of his strength. He half fell through the door, stumbling to his knees while keeping her cradled against him. The cabin was dark and nearly as cold as outside, the fire having died hours ago. Using movements that felt distant and clumsy, Caleb laid the woman on his bed and began the desperate work of building a fire. His hands wouldn't cooperate. The matches kept slipping from his numb fingers. When he finally got one lit, he nearly dropped it before touching it to the kindling. But the fire caught, and he fed it carefully until flames filled the hearth. Only then did he turn his attention back to the woman. In the growing firelight, he could see her more clearly. Her skin had gone beyond pale to a grayish blue. Ice crystals had formed in her hair and on her eyelashes. She looked more dead than alive. Caleb had seen hypothermia before, during the war. He knew the danger of warming someone too quickly, knew that bringing frozen limbs back to life too fast could kill as surely as the cold itself. He worked methodically, removed her wet outer clothes, wrapped her in his warmest blankets, positioned her near but not too near the fire. Then he warmed water and began the slow process of thawing her hands and feet in lukewarm liquid, gradually increasing the temperature. The woman didn't respond, didn't flinch, even when sensation must have been returning with excruciating pain. Hours passed. Caleb fed the fire, changed the water, monitored her breathing. Outside, the storm raged with full fury, wind howling around the cabin like something alive and hungry. Inside, warmth gradually returned, and with it, the first signs of response from the woman. A twitch in her fingers, a slight turn of her head. Near dawn, her eyes opened. They were dark, glazed with confusion and pain. They focused on Caleb's face, widened with sudden terror, and she tried to pull away with a strength that surprised him. Easy. He held up his hands, showing they were empty. You're safe. You're in my cabin. I'm not going to hurt you. She stared at him, chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed again into unconsciousness. Caleb sat back, exhausted beyond measure. Through his window, he could see the first grey light of dawn fighting through the storm. They'd made it through the night, both of them. But this, he realized as he looked at the terrified woman in his bed, this was only the beginning. On the third day, Caleb made the decision to return to Bent Creek. The second storm had passed, and though more snow would surely come, he had a window of opportunity. More importantly, he needed to know what story was being told in the settlement, what Thornhill's men had said, and whether anyone suspected Emma's survival. When he told Emma his plan that morning, fear flashed across her face so quickly he almost missed it. Please don't tell them I'm alive. I won't. I'll say you died on the trail, which is what I told them the first night. I just need to hear what they're saying, make sure no one is suspicious. What if they are? Then I'll know to be more careful. He was packing supplies, food, extra bandages, the few medical items he thought he might need. You'll be safe here. The cabin is well hidden, and no one comes up this way in winter. Keep the fire going, keep the door barred. I'll be back before dark. Emma struggled to her feet, using the bedpost for support. She was stronger now, able to stand for short periods, though her damaged feet made walking agonizing. What if something happens to you? What if you don't come back? There's food stored in the root cellar, accessed through the trap door in the corner. Enough to last you through winter if needed. The rifle is loaded, hanging over the door. You know how to shoot? No. Then don't touch it unless you absolutely have to. Point it at whatever scares you and pull the trigger. It kicks hard, so brace yourself. He pulled on his heavy coat, the same one he'd wrapped around her 3 nights ago. But nothing's going to happen. It's a simple trip down and back. You're afraid. She stated it as fact, not question. I can see it in your eyes. Caleb met her gaze steadily. I'd be a fool not to be a little concerned. But fear and caution aren't the same thing. I'm being cautious. And if they ask questions you can't answer, I'll answer them anyway. I've gotten good at conversation that goes nowhere. He moved toward the door, then paused. Emma, is there anything specific I should know? Anything that might come up that I need to be prepared for? She bit her lip, weighing something. Finally, they might ask about a locket. Silver with an engraving. If they do, if they seem particularly interested, tell them it wasn't on me, that I must have lost it. The one you're wearing. Her hand went to her throat automatically, confirming what he'd suspected. She hadn't taken it off since he'd found her. You saw it. Hard to miss, but I didn't mention it to anyone, and I won't. He studied her face. What's in it that matters so much? Proof of things that powerful men would rather stay buried. She looked down. It's why they wanted me dead. Emma. I'll tell you everything when you get back. I promise. But please, if they ask, say you don't know anything about a locket. Caleb nodded slowly. All right. I'll be back before dark. Keep safe. The journey down the mountain took most of the morning. The new snow had covered his previous tracks completely, and he had to navigate carefully, testing the trail ahead. His horse moved cautiously, sensing the danger of hidden ice beneath the powder. The pack horse, loaded light this trip, followed with the patient determination of an animal that had made this journey many times. Bent Creek appeared peaceful as he descended into the valley. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved about their business. Everything looked normal. But as Caleb rode toward the trading post, he felt that same wrongness he'd sensed before, a tension in the air that didn't match the calm appearance. Several men stood outside the trading post, talking in a tight cluster. They stopped when they saw Caleb approach, their conversation cutting off abruptly. He recognized Sheriff Morton among them, along with Bridger and two men he didn't know. Strangers by their dress and bearing. Caleb dismounted, tied his horse, and nodded a greeting. "Morning." "Stone." Morton's voice was neutral, but his eyes carried a warning. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." "Storm made me realize I'd forgotten a few items. Figured I'd better get them before the next one hits." Caleb kept his tone casual. "Everything all right here?" One of the strangers stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that had seen weather and violence in equal measure. His hand rested near his sidearm with the casual readiness of a man comfortable with its use. "You're the one who took the woman." It wasn't a question. Caleb kept his expression neutral. "I'm the one who found a dying woman on a bench and tried to help her." "Yes." "Where is she?" "Dead. Died about 2 hours up the trail. Cold got her before I could get her warm." The lie came easily, delivered with just enough regret to sound believable. "I buried her as best I could in the frozen ground. Wasn't much, but it was something." The stranger studied him with eyes that had seen too many liars to be easily fooled. "That so? And you came all the way back down in this weather to tell us that?" "I came back for supplies. But yes, I figured someone should know what happened to her." "Convenient. Very convenient." The man took a step closer. "I'm Cole Brennan. I work for Marcus Thornhill. The woman you claim is dead stole something from him. Something valuable. We want it back." "If she had anything of value." "I didn't see it. Like I said, she was nearly dead when I found her. I wrapped her in my coat, put her on my horse, and tried to get her somewhere warm. Didn't go through her pockets or take inventory of her possessions. There was a locket, silver engraved. You see anything like that?" There it was. The question Emma had predicted. Caleb shook his head. "No locket that I saw, but I wasn't looking for one either. My concern was keeping her alive, not cataloging her jewelry." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "Where exactly did you bury her?" "About 2 miles up the trail, off to the east side near a stand of 3 white pines. Like I said, it wasn't much of a burial. Ground's frozen hard. We'll want to see it. Be my guest. Trail's there, what's left of it under the new snow. Bring a shovel if you want to dig her up, though I can't imagine why you'd want to." Sheriff Morton intervened. "Mr. Brennan, I don't think there's cause to go disturbing a grave. Mr. Stone has a reputation for honesty. If he says the woman died, I'm inclined to believe him. Your inclination doesn't concern Mr. Thornhill." Brennan's voice held no compromise. "We'll ride up today, verify the burial. If everything is as Stone says, that's the end of it. If not..." He let the threat hang unfinished. "Fair enough." Caleb kept his voice level. "Though I'd recommend waiting a day or two. Another storm is coming in by tonight, and that trail will be suicide in a whiteout. We'll take our chances." Bridger cleared his throat. "Caleb, you needed supplies." "Can wait." Caleb untied his horse. "I'll come back in a few days when things settle down." "Running somewhere?" Brennan asked. "Going home. I've got a cabin to maintain and weather coming in. Unlike some folks, I actually live up in those mountains. I know what happens to people who underestimate winter storms." Caleb mounted his horse. "But like I said, you're welcome to try. Just don't blame me if you end up frozen like the woman you're looking for." He rode out of Bent Creek at a measured pace, not hurried but not dawdling either. Behind him, he could feel Brennan's eyes tracking his movement. The man was suspicious, and rightfully so. Caleb had a few hours at most before Brennan and his men would attempt the trail. The ride back up the mountain took on new urgency. Caleb pushed his horses as hard as he dared, knowing that time was now his enemy. If Brennan made it to where Caleb claimed he'd buried Emma, he'd find nothing. The lie would be exposed, and Thornhill's men would know Emma was still alive. More critically, they'd know Caleb had lied to protect her. He reached the cabin as early afternoon shadows stretched long across the snow. Emma was at the window, relief flooding her face when she saw him. He dismounted quickly and hurried inside. "They're coming," he said without preamble. "Thornhill's men. They asked about a locket, just like you said. I told them you were dead, buried on the trail. They're going to check." Emma's face went pale. "When?" "They said today, but I warned them about the incoming storm. They might wait, might not. Either way, we don't have much time." "What do we do?" Caleb was already moving, pulling supplies from shelves, gathering items with practiced efficiency. "We give them what they're looking for." "The locket? I can't—" "Not the locket. A grave." He stopped, met her eyes. "We're going to bury something 2 miles down the trail near 3 white pines. Something that will satisfy them if they dig it up." "What?" "A body." He saw her horror and quickly clarified. "Not a real one. We'll bundle clothes, weight them with rocks, bury them deep enough to make it difficult, but not impossible to find. In this cold, with the ground frozen and snow covering everything, they won't be able to examine it closely. They'll see what they expect to see, a hastily buried corpse." "Will it work?" "It has to." Caleb was filling a canvas bag with items. Clothes he didn't need, rocks from the pile near his fireplace, rope too, bind it all together. "Help me gather anything that might pass for a body. We need to do this quickly, before the light failed." They worked together, Emma moving slowly but determined, creating a crude simulacrum of a human form. Caleb used his oldest clothes, items that were worn and stained enough to look like they'd been on someone dying in the cold. He wrapped the bundle tight, weighted it properly, made it as convincing as he could. "Will they believe it?" Emma asked as he finished. "They'll want to believe it. That's the key." He hoisted the bundle. "Men like Brennan, they're looking for confirmation of what they already think. Give them that confirmation, and they'll stop looking deeper. And if they don't, then we'll face that when it comes." He moved toward the door. "Bar this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. I'll be back within the hour." The burial spot he described was real enough. 3 white pines standing together like sentinels. Caleb had passed them countless times on his trips up and down the mountain. He reached them as the sun touched the horizon, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. The ground was frozen as hard as iron. Digging took all his strength, his hands going numb even through thick gloves. But he managed to create a shallow depression, laid the bundle in it, and covered it with earth and snow. From a distance, it would look like a hastily constructed grave. Up close, if someone dug it up, it might pass for a frozen corpse long enough to satisfy cursory examination. It had to. Caleb rode back to his cabin through gathering darkness, the storm he'd predicted beginning to arrive. Snow started falling as he climbed the final stretch, and by the time he reached the cabin door, the wind had picked up to a howl. Emma unbarred the door and let him in. He was covered in snow, exhausted, but satisfied with his work. "It's done," he said. "Now we wait and see if they're foolish enough to try the trail in this weather." They didn't have to wait long. As full darkness fell and the storm intensified, they heard it. Distant sounds of horses, men's voices, the muffled crack of a branch breaking under weight. Brennan had come after all, storm or no storm, and somewhere down the mountain he was about to find what he was looking for. Caleb and Emma sat in the darkness, the fire banked low to avoid showing too much light through the windows. Outside, the storm intensified, wind battering the cabin walls with snow and ice. The sounds they'd heard had faded, swallowed by the weather, but both of them remained tense, listening. "Tell me now," Caleb said quietly. "The whole truth. If Brennan survives this night and finds what I buried, we might have a day or two of peace. But if he doesn't believe it, if he keeps looking, I need to know what we're really facing." Emma sat in the chair, wrapped in blankets, staring at the dim glow of the banked fire. When she spoke, her voice was steady but heavy with the weight of long-held secrets. "I wasn't the governess to Marcus Thornhill's children. I was his wife." Caleb kept his expression neutral, though the revelation struck him hard. "Go on." "I was 17 when we married. He was 38. My father owed him money. Gambling debts, bad investments. Marcus offered to forgive everything if I agreed to marry him. My father accepted before I had any say in the matter." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I thought I could make it work. I was young, naive. I believed in duty, in making the best of circumstances. But it didn't work. No." The word came out flat, final. Marcus wasn't cruel at first, just controlling. Every aspect of my life became his to direct. What I wore, where I went, who I spoke to. I told myself it was normal, that he was protective because he cared. But over time, the control became tighter. The cage became smaller. She paused, gathering strength to continue. From her pocket, she withdrew the locket Caleb had seen around her neck. She opened it carefully, and in the dim firelight, he could see a small photograph inside. A child's face, maybe 5 years old, with dark curls and serious eyes. "Catherine," Emma said softly. "My daughter. She'll be 6 in March." Caleb's chest tightened. "Where is she?" "With Marcus. He wouldn't let me take her when I fled. Used her as leverage, as punishment. Told me if I ever left, I'd never see her again." Tears traced down Emma's cheeks, though her voice remained controlled. "He was right. I left anyway." "Why? What made you finally run?" "I witnessed him murder his own brother." Emma's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Marcus's younger brother, Thomas, questioned some of Marcus's business dealings. Money missing from accounts, contracts that didn't exist, land purchased with funds Thomas couldn't trace. He confronted Marcus in his study one evening. I was in the next room, heard them arguing. She closed her eyes, remembering. Thomas threatened to go to the territorial marshal, said he had evidence of fraud and theft. Marcus told him that wouldn't be wise. Thomas said he couldn't be bought or frightened. And then, her breath hitched, and then I heard the shot. Just one. When I looked through the doorway, Thomas was on the floor, blood spreading across the carpet. Marcus was standing over him with a pistol. "He saw you." "Yes." At first he tried to explain it away. Said Thomas had drawn first, that it was self-defense. But I'd heard everything. I knew the truth. So Marcus changed tactics. He tried to buy my silence. Jewelry, money, promises. When that didn't work, he threatened me. Said if I spoke to anyone, I'd lose Catherine. Said he'd have me declared unfit, insane. That no court would believe a hysterical wife over a respected businessman. But you tried to leave anyway. I couldn't stay. Couldn't sleep next to a man who'd killed his own brother. Couldn't let Catherine grow up thinking that was normal, that violence and control were love. Emma opened the locket again, stared at her daughter's face. I waited 3 weeks, planned carefully, packed a bag with clothes and the evidence I'd gathered, Thomas's papers, account books, a letter he'd written detailing his suspicions. I hid everything in a small valise and planned to take Catherine in the night. What happened? Marcus was waiting. He'd known what I was planning somehow, had been watching me. He took the valise, took Catherine, and locked me in a room. The next morning, He had me arrested for theft. Said I'd stolen jewelry and money, had evidence planted in my things. The local sheriff was in his pocket, the judge too. I was convicted without a real trial, sentenced to 6 months in the territorial prison. Caleb's jaw clenched. How did you escape? During the transport, we stopped at a way station, and one of the guards, he'd been kind to me, had started to believe my story. He left my cell door unlocked, accidentally. Told me to run north, that the Northern Territories were outside Marcus's immediate influence. So I ran. And Thornhill's men caught you near Bent Creek. 3 days after I escaped, I thought I'd gotten far enough, been careful enough. But Marcus has resources I couldn't match. They found me at a creek crossing, brought me to Bent Creek, and her voice broke. And they left me on that bench to die slowly. Said it was Marcus's justice, that he wanted me to suffer for betraying him. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, the locket. Why is it so important? Emma's fingers trembled as she worked the back of the locket. It opened with a soft click, revealing a hidden compartment behind the photograph. Inside was a folded piece of paper, tiny and thin, covered in cramped handwriting. Thomas's letter, the last thing he wrote before confronting Marcus. It names witnesses to other crimes, details accounts and dates, provides evidence that would hang Marcus if presented to the right authorities. She refolded it carefully, closed the locket. It's the only copy. Thomas gave it to me the day before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should get it to the territorial marshal at Fort Prescott. He didn't trust anyone local. Prescott is 3 days' ride south. I know. I was trying to reach it when they caught me. Emma met Caleb's eyes. This is what you've gotten yourself into. Marcus Thornhill is powerful, wealthy, and completely ruthless. He's already killed at least one person I know of, probably more. And now he thinks you helped his wife escape justice. If he learns the truth, then we make sure he doesn't. Caleb stood, moved to the window, peered out into the storm. But first, we need to survive the immediate threat. Brennan is out there somewhere, probably wishing he'd listened to my warning about the weather. You think he found the grave? If he tried to reach it in this storm, he's either found it or frozen to death trying. Either way, we'll know by morning. He turned back to her. Emma, I need you to understand something. I can't take you to Fort Prescott myself. Not with winter like this, not with Thornhill's men watching, but come spring, when the pass is clear, you'd help me get there. Hope flickered in her eyes. Even knowing what you know now. Especially knowing what I know now. A man who'd kill his own brother, who'd leave his wife to freeze, who'd use his daughter as a hostage. That's not a man who deserves to keep power over anyone. Caleb's voice was firm, decided. You saved that letter, you survived, and you deserve the chance to see justice done. And Catherine? We'll find a way to get her out too. I don't know how yet, but we will. He sat back down across from her. One step at a time. First, we see if Brennan believes our ruse. Then we plan for spring. Emma wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders. Thank you, Caleb, for everything. For believing me. I believe what I see, and what I see is a woman who fought for herself and her daughter with everything she had. That's worth believing in. They sat together through the long night, the storm raging outside, the fire burning low. Somewhere out in that darkness, Brennan and his men were either finding their evidence or meeting their end in the mountain snow. By morning, they'd know which. But for now, in this moment, Emma had told her truth and found it believed. In this small cabin, far from civilization and its corrupt powers, she'd found something she hadn't experienced in 3 years of marriage to Marcus Thornhill. She'd found safety, she'd found an ally, and she'd found someone who saw her not as property or a problem, but as a person worth fighting for. That, more than the warmth of the fire or the shelter of the walls, gave her hope that tomorrow might bring something other than fear. Outside, the storm began to ease as dawn approached. Inside, two people who'd been strangers 4 days ago sat in companionable silence, bound now by shared secrets and shared determination. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Morning came gray and still. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the world encased in fresh snow that sparkled in the weak sunlight. Caleb rose first, as always, and built up the fire. Emma woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, one of the luxuries Caleb allowed himself, and the sound of him moving quietly around the cabin. "Any sign of them?" she asked, sitting up carefully. Nothing yet. Either they found the grave and left, or the storm caught them. He poured coffee into 2 cups. "We'll know soon enough." They waited through the morning, tension building with each passing hour. Caleb maintained his normal routine, tended the horses in the small stable attached to the cabin, checked his trap lines near the clearing, split firewood. But Emma noticed how his attention kept returning to the trail below, how his hand stayed near his rifle even when he was performing mundane tasks. Around noon, they heard horses approaching. Caleb moved to the window, Emma beside him despite her injured feet. Through the trees, they could see 2 riders picking their way up the trail. As they drew closer, Caleb recognized Sheriff Morton and Doc Holloway. No sign of Brennan or the other Thornhill men. "Stay out of sight," Caleb told Emma. "Let me handle this." She retreated to the corner behind the door as Caleb stepped outside, rifle held casually but ready. Morton and Doc Holloway stopped their horses at the edge of the clearing. "Stone," Morton called out. "Mind if we approach?" "Depends on why you're here." "To talk. Just talk. You have my word." Caleb considered, then nodded. The 2 men dismounted and walked forward slowly, hands visible and away from their weapons. "Where's Brennan?" Caleb asked. Morton's face was grim. "Dead. Him and both his men. They tried to make the trail yesterday evening despite your warning. Found their bodies this morning about 4 miles down. Storm caught them in an exposed section. They froze." Caleb felt a complex mix of emotions, relief that the immediate threat was gone, but also the weight of 3 deaths. Even men with dark purposes were still men. They find what they were looking for first? That's the question. Doc Holloway stepped forward. "They had shovels with them, looked like they'd been digging. Whether they found your burial site or not, we can't say, but they didn't make it back to tell anyone." "Why are you here telling me this?" Morton exchanged a glance with Doc. "Because when we found them, one of them, Brennan, had a piece of paper clutched in his hand. Frozen to his palm. We had to thaw it to read it." Caleb's stomach tightened. "And?" Morton pulled a folded paper from his coat. Even from a distance, Caleb could see it was damaged by moisture and cold, the ink running in places. "It's a letter. From someone named Thomas Thornhill. Talks about fraud, theft, murder, names, dates, and witnesses. Says his brother Marcus is guilty of just about everything short of treason. Where did you get that? That's what we need to know." Doc's voice was gentle but insistent. "Because if Brennan found it in that grave you dug, that means the woman who was supposed to be dead had it on her. And if she had something like this, it means maybe she wasn't the thief and liar Thornhill's men claimed." Caleb kept his expression neutral. "Maybe Brennan brought it with him. Maybe he was the one planning to use it against Thornhill." "Come on, Stone." Morton's patience frayed slightly. "We're not fools. Brennan worked for Thornhill. He wouldn't have evidence against his own employer unless he took it from someone. From the woman. From Emma Thornhill." The name hung in the air between them. Caleb said nothing. "We did some asking around after Brennan died," Doc continued. "Sent a wire to a colleague down south. Emma Thornhill is Marcus's wife, not his governess. She witnessed him murder his brother and tried to escape with evidence. Marcus had her arrested on false charges, and she escaped during transport. Everything Brennan said about her was a lie. If you know all this, why are you here? Because we need to know if she's alive. Morton's voice carried urgency now. If she survived, if she's still alive somewhere, she needs to get to Fort Prescott with this evidence. It's enough to hang Thornhill and break his hold on the Southern Territory. But only if she testifies. Caleb looked between the two men, weighing his options. Trust was a difficult thing, earned slowly. But these men had come alone, unarmed in spirit if not in fact, with information that helped rather than hindered. And more critically, they'd come despite the risk to themselves. "Why do you care?" he asked finally. "Both of you have lived under Thornhill's shadow long enough. Why risk crossing him now?" Doc spoke first. "Because I let that woman sit dying on a bench outside my window and did nothing. Because I've made enough compromises with my conscience, and I'd like to die with at least one right action to my name." Morton was quiet for a moment longer. Then, "My sister lived in Thornhill Territory. 3 years ago, she testified against one of his foremen who'd assaulted her. The case was dismissed, and 2 weeks later her house burned down with her in it. They said it was an accident. It wasn't." His jaw clenched. "I've waited a long time for a chance to make that right. This letter is that chance." Caleb studied both men, looking for deception and finding only honest conviction. Finally, he made his decision. She's alive, she's inside, and she's still recovering from frostbite and exposure. Relief washed across both their faces. Doc moved toward the cabin, but Caleb held up a hand. "Before you go in there, you need to understand something. Emma Thornhill has been hunted, betrayed, and left to die by people she should have been able to trust. If either of you gives me any reason to doubt your intentions, this conversation ends poorly." "Understood," Morton said. "We're here to help." Caleb led them inside. Emma stood in the corner, the rifle in her hands aimed steadily at the door. When she saw Doc and Morton, her eyes widened, but she didn't lower the weapon. "It's all right," Caleb said gently. "They know the truth. They want to help." "The truth?" Emma's voice was bitter. "What truth would that be? That I'm a thief, a liar, a woman who abandoned her child?" "The truth that you're Marcus Thornhill's wife," Doc said quietly. "That you witnessed him murder his brother, that you tried to escape with evidence that could bring him to justice. That truth." Emma lowered the rifle slowly, but wariness remained in her eyes. "How do you know this?" Morton held up the water-damaged letter. "Because Brennan had this when he died. Thomas Thornhill's letter, naming his brother as a murderer. The letter that was hidden in your locket." Emma's hand went to her throat, found the locket still there. Her face registered confusion, then understanding dawned. "The fake grave, the body Caleb buried. You put the letter with it?" Caleb shook his head. "I didn't. I buried clothes and rocks, nothing more." "Then how—" Emma's eyes widened. "The locket. I took it off yesterday while I was washing, left it on the table while I cleaned the chain. Did you—" "I made a copy of the letter while you were resting," Caleb admitted. "Didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. I figured if Brennan was looking for evidence, giving him something to find might satisfy him. So I put the copy in the bundle I buried." "You risked everything on a copy?" "I risked the copy. The original is still safe." He met her eyes. "I wasn't going to let you lose the only leverage you have." Emma sank into the chair, overwhelmed. He died with it in his hand. Brennan died thinking he'd succeeded. "And now Thornhill will think the evidence died with him," Morton said. "He'll believe the threat is over. That gives us an advantage." "What kind of advantage?" Emma asked. "The kind where we get you to Fort Prescott without him knowing you're coming." Morton pulled a map from his coat, spread it on the table. "The passes won't be clear for another 2 months at least. But come March, when the thaw starts, we can move. I'll escort you personally, along with anyone else willing to make the journey." "Thornhill has men everywhere," Emma protested. "They'll be watching." Not if they think you're dead. Not if Brennan's death confirms it. Doc leaned forward. Here's what they know. Brennan found evidence in a grave, proving the woman had what Thornhill wanted. Then he died trying to get back down the mountain. Natural conclusion. The evidence is gone. The woman is dead. The threat is over. He'll want confirmation, Emma said. He'll send more men. Let him. We'll show them the grave. Show them where Brennan died. The evidence supports the story. Morton's finger traced a route on the map. Meanwhile, you stay here through winter. Recover your strength. Come spring, we make our move. Caleb had been listening quietly. Now he spoke. There's something you're not mentioning. Emma has a daughter, Catherine, 5 years old, still with Thornhill. Even if we get Emma to Fort Prescott, even if the marshal arrests Thornhill, he'll use that child as leverage. The room fell silent. Emma's face showed the pain of that truth. He'll hurt her to get to me. I know he will. Then we get her out first, Morton said, before we make the move to Prescott. How? Emma's voice broke. She's in his house, surrounded by his men. How do we possibly? I don't know yet, Morton admitted. But we have 2 months to figure it out. 2 months to plan, to gather allies, to find a way. He looked at Emma with steady conviction. Your daughter's safety is part of this. We don't move until we know she'll be protected. Emma looked at Caleb, hope and fear warring in her expression. He nodded slightly, confirming his commitment. All right, she said finally. We plan, we prepare, and come spring, we end this. Doc examined Emma's frostbite damage, pronounced it healing as well as could be expected, and left supplies to help manage the pain. Morton and he prepared to leave as afternoon shadows lengthened. We'll come back when we can, Morton said at the door. Bring news, supplies, whatever we can manage without raising suspicion. Be careful, Caleb warned, if Thornhill suspects anything. He won't. As far as anyone knows, we came up to recover Brennan's body and verify the woman's death. That's the story, and we'll stick to it. Morton mounted his horse. Take care of her, Stone. She's the key to bringing down the most dangerous man in 3 territories. I'm not taking care of her because she's a key to anything, Caleb replied. I'm taking care of her because it's the right thing to do. Morton smiled slightly. That's why I trust you to do it. After they left, Caleb and Emma stood in the doorway, watching them disappear down the trail. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. It would have been beautiful, if not for the weight of everything they now carried. Do you think we can do it? Emma asked quietly. Really get Catherine out and get to Fort Prescott? I think we have to try. Caleb put his hand on her shoulder. And I think with Morton and Doc helping, our chances just got a lot better. Caleb? She turned to face him. Thank you for copying the letter, for protecting the original, for thinking ahead when I couldn't. We're in this together now. Partners. He smiled slightly. Besides, I've gotten used to having you around. Would be a shame to lose you to Thornhill's men after all this work keeping you alive. Emma laughed, a sound that surprised them both. It was the first time Caleb had heard her laugh, and it transformed her face, made her look young and alive in ways fear had prevented until now. That night, they sat by the fire and began planning in earnest. Winter stretched ahead of them, cold and long. But for the first time since Emma had fled her husband's house, she felt something other than despair. She felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward that didn't end with her frozen in the snow or Catherine lost forever. And sitting across from her, sketching routes on paper and calculating distances, was a man who'd saved her life and then decided to save something more, her future, her daughter, her chance at justice. In the mountains of the Northern Territory, far from civilization's reach, hope took root despite the winter cold. Winter settled in with the determination of a long siege. January brought cold so severe that water froze in its bucket within minutes of being brought inside. February added wind that howled through the mountain passes like the voices of the damned. But inside Caleb's cabin, life found its rhythm. Emma's body healed slowly. The frostbite took its toll as Caleb had predicted. She lost the tips of 2 fingers on her right hand and 3 toes on her left foot. Doc Halloway came when he could, trudging up the mountain on snowshoes to check her progress and change bandages. Each time, he brought news from below. Thornhill sent more men to verify Brennan's death, Doc reported on one visit in mid-January. They saw the grave, saw where Brennan and his men froze. They took Brennan's body back south. As far as anyone can tell, Thornhill believes you're dead. As far as anyone can tell, Emma repeated, the qualification not lost on her. It's the best we can hope for right now, Morton added. He'd accompanied Doc on this trip, bringing supplies and, more importantly, information. I've been making inquiries, careful ones. Thornhill's household in the Southern Territory. I've got a contact who works in the kitchen. She says Catherine is well, physically at least, but she's withdrawn, doesn't play with other children anymore. Just sits in her room or follows her father around like a shadow. Emma's hand trembled as she held her coffee cup. He's breaking her spirit. Or she's grieving her mother, Doc said gently. Either way, the longer she's there, the worse it gets. Then we need to move soon, Caleb said. How soon can the passes be traveled? Morton studied his map, worn now from frequent reference. Mid-March, if we're lucky. Early April, more likely. The southern route through Copper Canyon is the fastest, but it's also the most watched. Thornhill's men use it regularly. What about the northern route? Caleb pointed to a different path on the map, one that skirted higher into the mountains before descending toward Fort Prescott. More dangerous, takes twice as long. But you're right, less watched. Morton traced the route with his finger. If we could get Catherine out and meet you there, how do we get her out? Emma's voice carried the frustration of 2 months of planning without solving this central problem. Even if we had someone inside willing to help, Thornhill watches her constantly. Caleb had been quiet, thinking. Now he spoke. What if we didn't try to sneak her out? What if we took her openly? All eyes turned to him. Explain, Morton said. Thornhill thinks Emma is dead. He thinks the threat is over. That means his guard is down, relatively speaking. Caleb stood, began pacing as he thought it through. What if someone showed up with a legitimate reason to take Catherine somewhere? A reason Thornhill couldn't refuse without raising questions. Like what? Emma asked. A school. A finishing school for young ladies. Caleb looked at Doc. Do such things exist down south? Several. Wealthy families send their daughters to them. Doc's eyes widened as he caught on. You're thinking someone poses as a representative from a school, offering to take Catherine as a student. Exactly. A woman, well-dressed, with credentials that look legitimate. She arrives with letters of introduction, recommendations, tells Thornhill that his daughter has been selected for a prestigious program, that it's an honor, reflects well on his family. He'd never allow it, Emma protested. He uses Catherine as leverage. He won't let her out of his sight. Unless his pride overcomes his caution, Morton said slowly. Thornhill cares deeply about his reputation, his standing in society. If a finishing school, a prestigious one, offered to take his daughter, refusing might raise questions about why he's keeping a young girl isolated. And if the offer came at the right time, Doc added, when he's feeling secure, believing all threats are gone, he might say yes just to maintain appearances. Emma shook her head. It's too risky. Too many things could go wrong. Every plan is risky, Caleb said quietly. But this one has a chance of working precisely because it doesn't look like a plan. It looks like opportunity. The conversation continued late into the night, refining the idea, identifying problems, proposing solutions. They would need convincing credentials, a believable story, someone to play the role. Most critically, they needed timing to approach Thornhill at a moment when saying yes served his interests. There's a spring social in late March, Morton remembered. All the wealthy families from 3 territories attend. Thornhill always goes, makes sure he's seen. If we approached him there, in public, with other families watching, he'd have to at least consider it, Doc finished. Refusing outright would look suspicious. "Who plays the school representative?" Emma asked. They all looked at each other, the answer obvious but unspoken until Doc finally said it. "It has to be someone Thornhill has never seen before. Someone who can play a wealthy, educated woman convincingly." "I know someone," Morton said slowly. "My wife's sister, Margaret. She's a teacher in the Eastern Territories, visiting us for the winter. She's got the education, the bearing, and Thornhill has never met her." "Would she do it?" Caleb asked. "For a chance to bring down the man who killed my sister, she'd do it in a heartbeat." The weeks that followed were spent in detailed preparation. Margaret arrived at the cabin in early February, making the difficult journey up the mountain to meet Emma and learn everything about Catherine. She needed to know the child's temperament, her interests, the things that would make her trust a stranger. "She loves stories," Emma said, tears streaming down her face as she talked about her daughter. "Fairy tales especially. She believes in happy endings, in heroes and rescue. She's—" Emma's voice broke. "She's still innocent, despite everything she's seen." Margaret, a stern woman in her 40s with kind eyes, took notes and asked questions. She and Emma spent hours together, building a picture of Catherine that would allow Margaret to recognize and connect with the child quickly. Time would be limited once the extraction began. Everything had to move smoothly. Meanwhile, Caleb and Morton worked on the practical details. Route planning, timing, backup plans. They acquired clothes appropriate for the deception. Fine dresses, professional attire. Forged letters of introduction from a fictional finishing school in St. Louis. Everything had to withstand scrutiny long enough to get Catherine away from Thornhill's property. "Once we have her, we move fast," Caleb said, reviewing the plan for the 10th time. Margaret brings Catherine to the rendezvous point, here at Willow Creek Station. Emma meets them there. Then they ride north on the route we've mapped while I create a diversion. "What kind of diversion?" Emma asked, though she'd asked before. She needed the reassurance of repetition, the comfort of a plan repeated until it felt solid. "I'll make sure Thornhill's attention is focused elsewhere. Make him think Catherine went east, not north. By the time he realizes the truth, you'll be days ahead of his men." "And I'll be fine," Caleb assured her. "I know these mountains better than anyone. I can lose pursuers in terrain that would kill them if they followed." As March arrived and the snow began to melt, the cabin became a headquarters for the conspiracy. Morton and Doc made increasingly frequent visits, bringing updates and supplies. Margaret drilled her cover story until she could recite it in her sleep. Emma, now recovered enough to walk without severe pain, began riding again, rebuilding strength she'd need for the hard journey ahead. Caleb watched her progress with a mixture of pride and something else he couldn't quite name. Over these months, Emma had transformed from the terrified, broken woman he'd found on the bench into someone with purpose and determination. She still woke with nightmares sometimes, still flinched at sudden noises, but she'd found her strength again, forged it from necessity and hope. More than that, something had developed between them. Nothing spoken, nothing acted upon, but it was there in the way they worked together, the ease of their silences, the way their eyes met across the room and held for moments longer than strictly necessary. Caleb had not felt this way since Mary died, had not thought he could feel this way again. It complicated everything and simplified it at the same time. "What will you do after?" Emma asked him one evening in mid-March. They were alone, the others having left earlier that day. "After we've gotten Catherine out," After I've testified at Fort Prescott? Come back here, I suppose. This is my home. Even after all this. Even after... She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything that had happened. Where else would I go? With us. She said it quietly but firmly. Catherine and I, we'll need to start over somewhere far from Thornhill's reach. You could come with us. Caleb was silent, the offer hanging between them like something fragile and precious. Emma, I know it's too soon, too complicated. I'm asking you to leave your home for people you've known only a few months, but... She met his eyes. But I can't imagine doing this without you, not just getting Catherine out, but after, building a life. You've become... She searched for words. You've become essential. He wanted to say yes. Wanted to agree immediately, to promise he'd follow wherever she went. But years of solitude had taught him caution, had made him wary of attachments that could be torn away. Let's get through this first. Get Catherine safe, get justice done. Then we'll talk about what comes after. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but she nodded understanding. All right. After. The night before they were to begin, before Margaret would ride south to the spring social and set everything in motion, they all gathered at the cabin one last time. Morton, Doc, Margaret, Emma, and Caleb sat around the table, reviewing the plan one final time. Margaret approaches Thornhill at the social, presents the opportunity, Morton reviewed. If he agrees, she takes Catherine within 3 days, brings her to Willow Creek Station where Emma will be waiting. I'll have horses ready for the ride north, Doc added. Fresh mounts, supplies for 2 weeks. Caleb creates the diversion the same day Catherine leaves, Emma continued. Makes Thornhill think we've gone east. Then we all disappear until the territorial marshal makes his arrest, Caleb finished. Questions? No one spoke. They'd been over it so many times that questions had been exhausted. Now there was only the doing, the commitment, the risk. Then tomorrow we begin, Morton said. God willing, in 2 weeks this will all be over. God willing, Doc echoed. But as they said their goodbyes and made their final preparations, each of them knew that God's will was only part of the equation. The rest depended on timing, luck, and the desperate courage of people who decided that some things were worth any risk. Emma stood at the window after the others had gone, looking out at the stars above the mountain. Somewhere to the south, under those same stars, Catherine was sleeping. In 3 days, maybe less, Emma would see her daughter again, would hold her, protect her, finally make good on the promise she'd made when she'd fled, that she would come back, that she would save them both. Caleb stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. It's going to work. How do you know? Because it has to. Because we've prepared as well as we can, and because sometimes desperate plans are the only ones that succeed precisely because no one expects them. Emma took his hand, squeezed it gently. Thank you. For everything. For saving my life. For believing me. For helping me save Catherine. Whatever happens, I want you to know. I know, he said quietly. I know. And standing there in the darkness, looking out at the vast wilderness that had been his refuge and his prison, Caleb realized that somewhere along the way, he'd stopped hiding from life. Emma and Catherine had given him something he'd thought he'd lost forever. A reason to fight, a reason to hope, a reason to believe that tomorrow might bring something other than just another day of survival. Tomorrow they would begin, and whatever came after, they would face it together. The long winter was ending. Spring, with all its promise and peril, was finally here. Willow Creek Station was little more than a way station for travelers, a place to change horses and rest before continuing journeys. Emma waited there with Doc Holloway, pacing the small room they'd rented, watching the road with an intensity that made her eyes ache. They'll be here, Doc said for the 10th time. Margaret knows the route, knows the timing. So much could go wrong. What if Thornhill changed his mind? What if Catherine refused to go? What if someone recognized Margaret? Then we'd have heard by now. No news is good news. Emma moved to the window again, scanning the empty road. 3 hours passed, the expected arrival time. The sun was past its zenith, afternoon shadows beginning to lengthen. Every minute that passed felt like an hour, every hour like a day. Then, finally, dust on the horizon. A carriage approaching at speed. Emma's heart seized. She ran outside, Doc following close behind. The carriage pulled up in a spray of dust and gravel, and Margaret emerged, her face flushed with exertion and triumph. "We're here. We made it." She turned back to the carriage. "Catherine, sweetheart, come out now. There's someone here who's been waiting a very long time to see you." The child appeared in the carriage doorway, small and uncertain. Her eyes swept the station, found Emma standing frozen in place, and widened with recognition and disbelief. "Mama." The word was barely a whisper. Emma couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She opened her arms and Catherine launched herself forward, running across the distance between them. Emma caught her daughter and fell to her knees, holding her tight, rocking her, breathing in the scent of her hair and the solid reality of her presence. "You're alive," Catherine sobbed against her mother's shoulder. "Papa said you died. He said you left me because you didn't love me anymore." "No, baby, no, never. I've loved you every single moment. I've been fighting to get back to you." Emma pulled back just enough to see Catherine's face, to cup it in her hands. "Your father lied. I never stopped loving you, never stopped trying to find a way back. The lady, Miss Whitmore, she told me a story about a princess and her mother. She said it was about us. It was about us, and now we're together, and we're never going to be separated again." Emma stood, lifting Catherine with her. "But we have to leave now, right away. Do you understand? We have to go somewhere far away where Papa can't find us." Catherine's arms tightened around Emma's neck. "I don't want to go back to Papa. He's different when no one else is there. He's scary." Emma's jaw clenched. She'd known, of course, what Marcus was capable of, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that her daughter had experienced his cruelty, it ignited something fierce and protective in her chest. "You never have to see him again. I promise you that." Doc had been preparing horses while this reunion played out. Now he led 2 mounts forward, both saddled and ready. "We need to move. Thornhill will discover she's gone within hours once the carriage doesn't arrive at the next expected stop." Margaret was already climbing back into the carriage. "I'll lead them east, like we planned. Make them think we're heading towards St. Louis. That should buy you at least a day before they realize it's a decoy." "Be careful," Emma said. "When he realizes what's happened, I'll be safely across the territorial line before he knows anything. Morton is meeting me halfway." Margaret leaned down, touched Catherine's cheek gently. "Be brave, little princess. Your adventure is just beginning." Emma mounted her horse with Catherine held securely in front of her. Doc took the lead, and they set off north at a hard pace, following the route Caleb had mapped. Behind them, Margaret's carriage headed east, creating the false trail that would hopefully give them the time they needed. The ride was grueling. Catherine, not used to such long hours on horseback, grew tired and frightened as the landscape grew wilder and less familiar. Emma held her close, murmuring reassurances, pointing out birds and interesting rock formations, anything to distract from the discomfort and fear. "Where are we going?" Catherine asked as evening approached. "North, to meet a friend, a man named Caleb who helped Mama when she needed it most." Emma kissed the top of her daughter's head. "He's going to help us get somewhere safe." "Will I like him?" "I think so. He's kind and brave and—" Emma paused, realizing as she said it that it was true. "And he's someone very important to Mama." They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Catherine dozed against Emma's chest, her small body relaxed in sleep in a way that suggested she hadn't felt truly safe in a long time. Emma held her daughter and thought about what came next. The journey to Fort Prescott, the testimony, the uncertain future beyond. But for now, in this moment, Catherine was safe. That was enough. Dawn broke as they reached the planned rendezvous point, a sheltered canyon where Caleb was supposed to meet them. Emma scanned the area anxiously, searching for any sign of him. They were exposed here, vulnerable if Thornhill's men had somehow followed or cut them off. Then she saw him, emerging from the trees on his gray horse. Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy with it. Caleb rode up to them, his eyes finding Emma's first, confirming she was whole and safe. Then his gaze dropped to Catherine, and something softened in his expression. "Hello, Catherine," he said gently. "I'm Caleb. Your mother has told me so much about you." Catherine studied him with the serious intensity only children can manage. "Are you the hero? Miss Whitmore said there would be a hero." Caleb glanced at Emma, who smiled despite her exhaustion. "I'm just someone who wants to help. But if that makes me a hero in your story, I'll do my best to deserve it. Mama says you're important to her. She's important to me too. You both are." He looked at Emma. "Did anyone follow?" "Not that we saw. Margaret went east with the carriage. Doc split off an hour back to create another false trail." "Good. Then we have maybe a day before Thornhill realizes what's happened. We need to move." He gestured north. "The trail to Fort Prescott is 3 days hard riding. Can you make it?" Emma looked down at Catherine, saw her daughter's exhaustion, and felt her own fatigue threatening to pull her down. But she also felt the strength of having her child back, the determination that came from knowing they were so close to ending this. "We'll make it," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Caleb nodded, respect clear in his eyes. "Then let's finish this." They rode north together, 3 souls bound by circumstance and choice, heading toward a justice that had been too long delayed. Behind them, somewhere in the Southern Territory, Marcus Thornhill was just beginning to realize that his carefully controlled world was about to collapse. The reckoning was coming. And this time, there would be no escape, no buying of silence, no leaving witnesses to die in the cold. This time, truth would win. Fort Prescott rose from the plains like a promise of civilization in the wilderness. Its log walls and stone buildings represented something Emma hadn't dared hope for in 3 years. Safety backed by authority that couldn't be bought or intimidated. The territorial marshal, Daniel Hartwick, was a former Union colonel with a reputation for incorruptibility. When Emma, Caleb, and Catherine arrived on the afternoon of March 28th, travel-worn and exhausted, he received them immediately in his office. Emma told her story with Catherine sitting beside her, holding her hand. She produced the locket, revealed Thomas Thornhill's letter, and provided every detail she could remember about the murder she'd witnessed. Caleb and Catherine corroborated what they'd seen and experienced. By the time Emma finished, Marshal Hartwick's face was grim with contained anger. "I've heard rumors about Marcus Thornhill for years," he said. "But rumors aren't evidence, and he's been very careful to keep himself protected. This," he held up the letter, "this is what I've needed." "Will it be enough?" Emma asked, fear evident in her voice. "He has friends, powerful people. Not in my jurisdiction, he doesn't. And murder is murder, regardless of how many judges you've bought in other territories." Hartwick stood, decisive. "I'll ride out tomorrow with a full company of soldiers. We'll arrest Thornhill and bring him here for trial. You'll need to testify, but I promise you'll be protected while you're under my authority." "What about Catherine?" Emma's arm tightened around her daughter. "If he's brought here for trial, if he sees her, she'll be kept separate. He won't have access to her, won't be able to threaten or manipulate her." Hartwick's voice was firm. Mrs. Thornhill, you have my word. Your daughter's safety is my priority." 3 weeks later, Marcus Thornhill stood trial at Fort Prescott. The proceedings were swift and thorough. Emma testified for 2 full days, recounting not just the murder of Thomas Thornhill, but years of abuse, control, and manipulation. Other witnesses came forward, servants who'd been too afraid to speak before, business associates who'd suspected irregularities, even a judge from a neighboring territory who admitted under oath that Thornhill had attempted to bribe him. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree. Marcus Thornhill was hanged on April the 20th, 1874. Emma didn't attend the execution. She sat instead with Catherine in the small house Marshal Hartwick had provided them, holding her daughter and looking toward the future instead of the past. By May, when the mountain passes had fully cleared and spring had turned the landscape green, Emma and Catherine were ready to leave Fort Prescott. The question was, where would they go? Caleb had stayed through the trial, a steady presence at Emma's side. He'd provided testimony about finding her, about Thornhill's men and Brennan's death. But more than that, he'd been there in the quiet moments, offering strength when Emma's own faltered, making Catherine laugh when the weight of everything threatened to crush them. Now, as they prepared to depart, the unspoken question finally demanded an answer. They stood on the porch of the house, watching Catherine play in the yard with a wooden horse Caleb had carved for her. The child had blossomed in these weeks of safety, her laughter returning, her fear receding. She still had nightmares sometimes, still looked over her shoulder more than a child should, but she was healing. "I've been thinking," Emma said quietly, "about what you said that night, about going somewhere far from Thornhill's reach, starting over. And I want to go west, all the way west to the coast, somewhere no one knows us, where Catherine can grow up without the shadow of her father's name." She looked at Caleb. "But I don't want to go alone." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I've lived on that mountain for 5 years, built my whole life around being alone, not needing anyone. I told myself it was what I wanted. And now I know I was wrong. I wasn't living up there. I was just existing, marking time, waiting for nothing." He watched Catherine play, saw her run to show Emma something she'd found. "You and Catherine, you reminded me what it means to be alive, what it means to have something worth fighting for. Then come with us. Help us build something new." Emma took his hand. "Not as someone who saved us, but as family, if you want that." Caleb looked down at their joined hands, then up at Emma's face. He saw hope there, and uncertainty, and something else. Love, still tentative but real. He thought about his cabin in the mountains, the solitude he'd chosen, the life he'd built from grief and withdrawal. Then he thought about Catherine's laughter, about Emma's strength, about the warmth of shared purpose and shared space. The choice was surprisingly easy. "Yes," he said simply. "I want that." Emma smiled, tears streaming down her face, and kissed him. It was brief, gentle, a promise of more to come. Catherine saw from the yard and squealed with delight, running to them. "Does this mean Caleb is staying with us forever?" Emma looked at Caleb, who nodded. "Forever," she told Catherine, "if he'll have us." "I carved you a horse," Catherine said seriously to Caleb. "Well, I tried. It looks more like a rock with legs. But it's for you, so you remember us even when you're not with us." "I'll treasure it," Caleb assured her. "But I don't need a reminder. I'm coming with you and your mother, all the way to the coast and wherever else you want to go." Catherine threw her arms around his waist. "Then we're a real family now, like in the stories." "Like in the stories," Caleb agreed, his hand resting on her head. They left Fort Prescott a week later, heading west toward a future unwritten. The wagon carried their few possessions, including a hand-carved wooden spoon that Caleb had made for Catherine. A simple thing, but one she insisted on keeping always as a reminder of where they'd been and what they'd survived. As they traveled, Emma watched Caleb teach Catherine to identify animal tracks, to read the weather, to appreciate the vast beauty of the land around them. She saw her daughter's eyes light up with curiosity and wonder, saw her learn to trust this quiet man who'd become essential to both their lives. And she thought about that frozen night at the trading post, when she'd been left to die and no one had helped. Until one man had decided that doing nothing was worse than any risk. That one choice, that moment of compassion in the darkness, had saved not just her life, but Catherine's future and Caleb's soul. Sometimes the measure of a man truly was found in what he did when no one else was watching, in the choice to give his warmth away and trust he'd find more within himself. They reached the coast in late summer, found a small town that needed a carpenter and a seamstress, and built a house overlooking the ocean. It wasn't large or fancy, but it was theirs, earned by courage and sacrifice and love. Catherine started school in the fall, bright and curious and no longer afraid. Emma opened a small shop, her sewing skills bringing in steady income. Caleb worked with his hands, building and repairing, and found satisfaction in creating rather than merely surviving. And in the evenings, the three of them would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the water, Catherine between them, all of them finally home. Years later, when Catherine was grown and living her own life, she would tell her children about her mother's courage and Caleb's kindness. She would tell them about the winter night that changed everything, about the man who gave his coat to a stranger and saved more than just one life. And her children would learn that heroes weren't always warriors or princes from fairy tales. Sometimes they were just ordinary people who chose compassion when the world offered them excuses for indifference. People who understood that the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways impossible to measure. The heavy wool coat hung in the closet of their coastal house, worn and patched but carefully preserved. They kept it as a reminder of where they'd been, yes, but more importantly, as a symbol of what they'd become. A family forged not by blood or circumstance, but by choice and love, and the fierce determination to protect what mattered most. On cold mornings, Caleb would sometimes take it down and wear it while he worked. Emma would see him and smile, remembering. And in that smile was everything: gratitude, love, and the deep peace that comes from knowing you've found your place in the world. Sometimes, after all, the stories do have happy endings. Not because the world is kind, but because people choose to be kind even when the world isn't. And that choice, repeated over and over, changes everything.